The last thing Daniel said to his twin brother that morning was that he would race him to the canoe rack after breakfast, and Aaron laughed in that quick, uneven way he had since he was small, the laugh that always sounded like it surprised him. And he said, "Go ahead and try." And that was the last sentence the brothers exchanged in the version of their lives where everything still made sense. It was the 7th of July, 1988, and the fog had not yet lifted off the surface of Loon Hollow Lake. The water sat under a thin gray skin that pulled apart in slow patches as the sun climbed over the ridge behind the dining hall, and somewhere in the woods a wood thrush was calling. That fluted three-note song that goes through the trees like a thread being pulled. The boys were 13. They had matching grass stains on the right knee of identical green camp shorts. They had identical dark hair cut by the same woman in the same kitchen in Marbury, Pennsylvania, 3 days before they were dropped off at the gate of Camp Wendigo Pines. In the cabin called Beaver 3, their bunks were stacked one above the other. Aaron on top because he liked to sleep close to the screen and listen to the loons at night, Daniel below because he claimed the bottom bunk was warmer, and the truth was he sometimes still wanted to know his brother's foot was close enough to kick. On the wooden shelf between the bunks they kept their things the way they always kept their things at home. 2 flashlights aligned head to tail, 2 folded swim towels, blue on top, green on the bottom. 2 paperback books face down so the pages would not lose their place. And 1 yellow plastic compass, scratched on the dome, that had belonged to their father before he died, that the boys had agreed at the age of 9 they would share, 1 week each, passed back and forth on Sunday mornings the way other brothers passed a baseball. That morning at 7:07, the compass was on Aaron's side of the shelf. It was Aaron's week. Daniel noticed it as he sat up. He noticed the way a person notices the things they have been counting their whole life without realizing they were counting. Their older sister, Caroline Vance, was 19 years old that summer, a sophomore studying nursing at a small college near Harrisburg, and she had a job lifeguarding at a public pool 2 hours away from where her brothers had been dropped off. Every Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock, the camp office let campers make 1 10-minute call home. And every Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock, Caroline sat at the wall phone in her dormitory kitchen, with the receiver in her left hand and her right hand wrapped around a chipped white coffee mug she had taken from her mother's house when she went away to school. The mug had a tiny crack running down one side that leaked a single thin line of coffee onto the table every Sunday at 4:06. And every Sunday at 4:06 Caroline wiped it with the same brown dish towel and did not buy a new mug, because Aaron had been the one who picked it out for their mother at a yard sale when he was 8. And small things like that mattered to her in a way she could not yet explain to herself. On the 10th of July, a Sunday, Caroline sat at the wall phone at 3:57. She watched the second hand of the kitchen clock. She watched 4 o'clock pass. She watched 4:01, 4:02, 4:03, and the slow stain of coffee crept down the side of the cracked mug onto the laminate and pooled there, and she did not wipe it. At 4:09 she told herself the line at the camp office was probably long. At 4:18 she told herself the boys had probably gone canoeing and lost track. At 4:31 she told herself a counselor had probably forgotten to walk them down, that her brothers were teenagers now and teenagers forget. At 4:46 she told herself she was being a worried older sister, and her mother always said worried older sisters spoiled the people they loved. At 5:02 she stopped telling herself anything. She picked up the phone. Her hand was steady. She would remember that later, the steadiness of her own hand, and she would not understand it. The woman who answered at the office of Camp Wendigo Pines was a seasonal hire named Marlene Ostrander, 51, a secretary at a regional school district who took 2 summer weeks at the camp every year for the quiet. Marlene's voice on the phone was bright the way camp voices are bright in July. She said, "Hello, dear, what can I do for you?" Caroline said her name. She said the names of her brothers. She said it was Sunday and they had not called. There was a silence on the other end that did not feel like a small silence. Marlene said, "Let me check the sign-in for the call hut, sweetheart. Just one moment." Caroline heard her set the receiver down. She heard a chair move. She heard a screen door open and close in the distance. She heard footsteps come back. Marlene said, "Honey, when did you last hear from them?" Caroline said, "Last Sunday at 4. Marlene said, okay, honey, I'm going to put you on with the director. Just hold on, all right." The director was a man named Howard Pell, 44, a former phys ed teacher with a clipped gray mustache, and he came on the line within 90 seconds. Howard said, "Caroline, I want you to listen to me. Your brothers were at the morning swim check yesterday, and at the campfire last night. This is going to be all right." He did not say where they had been this morning. He did not say where they were now. Caroline said, "Okay." Caroline said, "Please call me back in 1 hour." She wrote the camp number on the inside of her forearm with a blue ballpoint pen. She hung up. She sat at the table. She did not move for 40 minutes. The mug leaked. The callback came at 6:43. Howard's voice was different. Howard said, "Caroline, we need your mother's number." Howard said, "We need it now." 290 state troopers, volunteer firefighters, and Department of Conservation officers were on the grounds of Camp Wendigo Pines by sunrise on the 11th of July. The camp sat on the southwest shore of Loon Hollow Lake, which was an irregular kidney-shaped body of water 16 miles long and 1.25 miles at its widest. The second largest natural lake in the Allegheny region of north-central Pennsylvania, fed by 3 creeks and drained by 1, ringed by mixed hardwood forest that climbed steeply on all 4 sides into the part of the state where the cell signal would die for the next 19 years, not because of distance, but because of the bowl of the land. It was the kind of forest where the canopy closed so tightly overhead that at 1 PM the trail at Hemlock Drop turned the color of wet slate. And you could pass a man standing 12 feet off the path and not know he was there until he chose to step into the light. The investigators built a timeline in 3 days. Aaron and Daniel Vance had eaten breakfast in the dining hall on the morning of the 10th of July at 7:22, both of them, observed by 3 counselors and approximately 90 other campers. At 8:05, they had reported to the boating shed for canoe orientation. At 8:31, the boating counselor, a college freshman named Kyle Mendez, 20, had checked them off for a pre-approved trip across the inlet to a small rocky beach known to the camp as the Apron, a 400-yard paddle from the dock. They were wearing orange foam life jackets. They were in a green aluminum canoe with the number 12 painted on the bow. They were due back at 10:30 for the next group's slot. They never came back. The canoe was found at 9:58 that morning by a counselor sent to look for them. It was beached on the Apron exactly where it was supposed to be, exactly the way the boys would have beached it, the paddles lying parallel inside the hull, the life jackets folded, not dropped, on the seat. There was no sign of struggle on the sand. There was no sign of anything on the sand at all. The boys' footprints walked 12 feet up the beach toward the tree line and then ended at the edge of a flat slab of granite that ran up into the woods. From the granite there was nothing. No trail, no fabric, no call, no echo. The investigators searched in concentric rings outward from the Apron for 16 days. They put divers in the inlet. They put dogs along every trail within 4 miles. They walked the shoreline of Loon Hollow Lake, foot by foot from the camp dock to the dam at the southern end and back again. They flew 2 helicopters in alternating shifts. They drained one shallow cove with portable pumps. They found one thing. They found, on the 18th of July, on a moss-covered log a quarter of a mile up the granite slope, set carefully in the center of the log the way you would set a small offering, the yellow plastic compass that had belonged to the Vance boys' father. It was not dropped. It was placed. The scratched dome faced north. The needle was true. The lead investigator, Sergeant Edwin Pruitt, 56, of the Pennsylvania State Police, made the decision that the compass meant the boys had gone up the granite slope on their own, and that they had been alive and oriented at least as far as that log. He committed 3/4 of the search resources to the ridges above the apron for the next 11 days. He found nothing else. On the 29th of July, a thunderstorm moved through the basin and dropped 2 inches of rain in 90 minutes, and any track that might have existed past the log was gone. On the 3rd of August, the active search was scaled to a recovery operation. On the 12th of August, it was suspended. If you need a moment, we understand. Stay with us, because what a diver discovered 19 years later in the water below that beach will make you question every conclusion those investigators reached in the first terrible weeks of 1988. And it will make you understand that the compass on the log was never a clue to where the boys had gone. The compass on the log was a signature. For the next 19 years, Caroline Vance lived inside the waiting. She finished her nursing degree. She did not marry. She moved back to Marbury and into the small gray house on Wexford Street, where her mother lived alone now, because her father had died in a paper mill accident when the boys were 6, and Caroline was 12, and the women in that house had been holding each other up for a very long time. Caroline took a job in the emergency department at the regional hospital in Williamsport, an hour from home, and she drove that hour each way in a 1984 Ford station wagon with a rear window that did not close completely, and every Sunday at 4:06 she sat at the kitchen table with the cracked white mug, and watched the thin brown line crawl down the side and pool on the table, and she wiped it with the same brown dish towel, until the dish towel was a soft pale tan that had forgotten what color it used to be. On the 10th of July of every one of those 19 years, she drove 3 hours up to the gate of Camp Wendigo Pines, which had closed in 1991 and stood with its sign rotting and its dock half sunk into the inlet, and she walked the 400 yards from the boat, shed, to the apron, and she sat on the flat granite slab where her brother's footprints had ended, and she did not cry. She brought a thermos of coffee in the cracked white mug, even though it was a terrible mug for travel and leaked into her bag every time. She sat for 1 hour. She walked back. Once she found a child's hair tie at the edge of the path, and she carried it home and put it in a drawer in her bedroom, and she did not know why. There were several drawers like that in her bedroom by the 7th year. There were many by the 12th. The thing she stopped being able to do was the simple thing. She could not lay 2 of anything side by side on a shelf. She did not realize it for several years. She noticed it one morning when she opened her own kitchen cabinet and saw that she had 3 coffee mugs and 5 plates and 1 drinking glass, and that when she ran the dishwasher she ran it half empty, and that whenever a friend gave her a matching pair of anything, earrings, candlesticks, salt and pepper shakers, she put one of the 2 in the drawer with the hair tie and used the other one alone. She read about this once in a magazine in the hospital break room. The article said the technical term was something about magical thinking, and Caroline closed the magazine and put it back on the table and did not finish her coffee. The thing she could not stop doing was the thing she could not explain. Every Sunday at 4 o'clock, even 19 years later, she sat at the kitchen table with the cracked mug. She did not pick up the phone. She did not dial anyone. She just sat there for 10 minutes, from 4 to 4:10. and then she got up and went on with her Sunday. Her mother, who had grown small and quiet in the years since the boys went missing, never asked her what she was doing. Her mother knew. Her mother sat in the other room and waited for the 10 minutes to pass, and then came into the kitchen and put her hand on Caroline's shoulder and squeezed once and walked away, and that was a Sunday in the Vance house for 19 years. The man who would find the first thing in the water was named Theodore Ramos, 37, a commercial diver from Erie who specialized in inspection work on bridge pilings and dam intakes. He had nothing to do with the Vance case. He had nothing to do with missing children. He had never set foot in Loon Hollow Lake before the morning of the 14th of June, 2007, and the only reason he was there that morning was because a small hydroelectric company called Allegheny Run Power had bought the rights to install a low-head turbine on the dam at the southern end of the lake, and someone in the company had hired Theodore's two-man outfit to inspect the upstream face of the dam and the bottom of the inlet where the new pipe would be sunk. Theodore was not even diving on the right side of the lake. He was at the south end, 4.5 miles south of the apron, where the bottom dropped to 51 feet, and the water held a steady black-green silt that you could not see your own hand through with a spotlight on. He was checking the concrete face of the dam. He had been in the water for 40 minutes. He was tired and cold, and his right ear was bothering him from the pressure. He wanted to surface, get a coffee, and come back down for the second pass. He turned to swim along the toe of the dam toward his ascent line. His light passed over something dark and angular wedged between two slabs of broken concrete at the base of the dam. His brain told him it was tire. People dumped tires in lakes. People dumped a lot of things in lakes. He almost kept going. He paused. He brought the light back. He floated 3 feet above the thing and let the silt settle. It wasn't tire. The shape was wrong. Tires were round. This thing had corners. It had a flat side that ran on for 1.5 feet and then a perpendicular edge. The color, where his light hit it directly, was not the soft gray of submerged rubber. The color was a dull oxidized green. The green that aluminum goes when it has been in still water for a very long time. The green of an old aluminum canoe. He floated down. He put his gloved hand on it. He did not call the surface immediately. He swept his light along the length of it, slowly, because in 19 years of professional diving he had learned that the first thing his light passed over was almost never the most important thing, and he wanted to see what else was down there before he started anything. The canoe was lying on its side, partially crushed at the bow by a slab of broken concrete that had clearly fallen from somewhere along the upper face of the dam in the years since the boat had come to rest there. The number 12 was just barely legible on the side of the hull, painted in a flat white that had survived, because the canoe had been resting under 30 feet of water with very little light. There was a length of yellow rope tied to the front thwart. The rope did not float free. The rope went taut at an angle into the silt under the concrete slab. Theodore traced the rope with his light. It ran for about 6 feet and then disappeared into the bottom. He did not pull on it. He went up. On the surface, he sat on the inflatable for a long time without taking off his mask. His partner, a younger diver named Felix Crow, 29, asked him what he had seen, and Theodore did not answer for a while. He took off his glove. He found his phone in the dry bag. His fingers were stiff from the cold. He dialed 3 numbers. He told the dispatcher that he had found a canoe at the base of the Loon Hollow Dam, and that there was a rope tied to it, and that the rope went into the silt, and that someone should probably send somebody. The dispatcher asked him to repeat himself. He repeated himself. The dispatcher asked if he was sure. Theodore said yes, And then he sat on the pontoon of the inflatable in his wetsuit and looked at the southern shore of the lake and at the spruce trees standing on it dark green and absolutely still. And he did not say anything else for 45 minutes while they waited for the troopers to come. When the state divers came down, they were equipped and prepared in a way Theodore had not been. They followed the rope. The rope was not knotted to anything biological. The rope was knotted, 6 feet from the canoe, to a 30-pound cinder block. The cinder block was the kind sold at hardware stores across the United States in the 1980s. They photographed the canoe. They cut the rope. They raised the canoe carefully on lift bags. Inside the canoe, wedged under the seat by the pressure of decades of silt, they found 2 orange foam life jackets, folded the way the original counselor had described in his report from July of 1988, blue tag on top, green tag on the bottom. They did not find any human remains in the canoe. They expanded the search of the basin around the dam. On the second day they found, lodged in the rocks at the base of the spillway, a small leather wallet that contained a Pennsylvania driver's learner permit issued to one Aaron Vance, address on Wexford Street, Marbury. Date of birth April 12, 1975. The permit had been issued on the 15th of April, 1988, 3 months before the disappearance. It was the first thing in his life Aaron had ever been allowed to carry that proved he was a person in the world. On the third day, a side-scan sonar passed over the basin and registered a contact about 90 yards north of the canoe, in deeper water, against the eastern wall of the inlet. The divers went down. They came up. They went down again with cameras. What they found on the third day was a steel box about the size of a footlocker, sitting upright on a small rock shelf at 46 feet, padlocked, wrapped twice in a chain that had rusted to a flaky orange. It was not the kind of thing a child would carry. It was not the kind of thing 2 children would carry. It took 2 days to bring the box up without destroying what was inside it. They cut the chain on the dock under tarps with 2 state troopers and a forensic photographer present. They opened the box. Inside the box, sealed in heavy plastic that had survived because the box had been airtight at the seal until the chain corroded, were 3 things. The first thing was a stack of Polaroid photographs. The second thing was a small spiral-bound notebook with a brown cover. The third thing was a child's yellow plastic compass with a scratched dome and a needle that pointed true north. The photographs were of children. The photographs were of many children, taken over many years, taken in many different places that were all the same kind of place, taken in the woods and at the edges of lakes and on the back porches of cabins that no longer existed. Some of the photographs were of Aaron and Daniel Vance. The photographs of Aaron and Daniel had been taken before the 10th of July, 1988. Some of them had been taken weeks before. Some had been taken months before. In several of them, the boys were at the dining hall of Camp Wendigo Pines, eating, talking to each other, unaware. In one of them, the boys were sitting on the dock with their feet in the water, and the photograph had been taken from above and behind them, at a distance and slightly to the side, as if the person taking it had been standing on a low rise above the dock with a long lens. In the notebook with the brown cover, in a careful, blocky handwriting that was either an adult trying to look like a child or a man who had never quite grown out of the way he had written at 12, there were dates and weights and what looked like notes about behavior. The names at the top of each page were not Aaron and Daniel. The names at the top of the pages were nicknames. There were 11 sets of names in the notebook. The dates went back to 1976. The compass in the box was an exact copy of the Vance boys' father's compass, the same scratched dome, the same yellow plastic. The compass was not their father's. Their father's was in an evidence locker in Williamsport, where it had been since the 18th of July, 1988. This was a second compass. This compass had been bought new at some point and aged deliberately. The dome had been scratched in a pattern that was almost but not quite the same as the Vance compass's pattern. Almost, not quite. When the lab report on the Polaroids came back 2 weeks later, the chemical degradation of the prints could be roughly dated by analysis of the emulsion, and the earliest prints in the box dated to the late 1970s. The cameras were 3 different Polaroid models, all manufactured between 1974 and 1983. The man who had taken these photographs had been doing this for 30 years. The investigators reactivated the original case file. They reread every interview, every statement, every report from July of 1988. They cross-referenced the nicknames in the notebook against the rosters of Camp Wendigo Pines from 1976 through 1990, and against the rosters of 3 other camps in the region that had operated during the same period, because the geography of the photographs did not all match Loon Hollow. The cross-reference was slow because some of the rosters had been lost when the camps closed, and what was left had to be reconstructed from old newspaper write-ups and from memories of former counselors who were now in their 50s. A pattern emerged in October of 2007. Of the 11 sets of nicknames in the notebook, 7 could be matched to children who had gone missing between 1976 and 1988 in a roughly 200-mile arc of north-central and northwestern Pennsylvania, all near rural summer camps. All in the months of June, July, or August, all under circumstances that had at the time been ruled wandering, drowning, or accident. 3 of the 7 were sibling pairs. 1 was a set of cousins. The Vance boys were the most recent. After 1988, there were no more names in the notebook. The investigators did not know yet why the notebook stopped in 1988. They did not know yet whether the man had stopped or whether he had simply stopped writing things down. They did know one thing. They knew that whoever had folded the life jackets in the canoe on the morning of the 10th of July, 1988, had folded them deliberately, because it had been important to him that the scene be tidy. That had not been the act of a child. That had been the act of a man who had spent a long time at the edge of children's lives, and who had developed, somewhere along the way, his own private definition of what taking care of something meant. The man's name, when they found him, was Vernon Whitlock, 64, a retired groundskeeper. He was living in a single wide trailer on 5 acres of hardwood forest in McKean County, Pennsylvania, 2.5 hours from Loon Hollow Lake. He had been a groundskeeper at Camp Wendigo Pines from 1974 until the camp's closure in 1991. He had been a groundskeeper at 2 of the other 3 camps in the cross-reference at various points before that. He had worked in the woods of north-central Pennsylvania his entire adult life. When the state troopers came up his rutted gravel driveway on the morning of the 2nd of November, 2007, with Sergeant Edwin Pruitt, now 75 and called in as a courtesy because the case had been his. Riding in the passenger seat of the lead car, Vernon Whitlock was sitting on a metal folding chair on a square of cracked concrete in front of his trailer, drinking a cup of black coffee from a thermos, watching 3 of his chickens cross the yard. He stood up when the cars pulled in. He set the coffee on the concrete. He waited for them to walk up to him with his hands relaxed at his sides. He was wearing flannel and a wool cap. He looked like any other man you might pass in any small town in that part of the country. He looked, more than anything, like he had been expecting them for 19 years. He did not run. He did not deny anything when they showed him the photographs in the interrogation room at the State Police Barracks in Coudersport, Pennsylvania, 6 hours later. He sat at the metal table with his hands folded on the surface of it, and he looked at the photographs one by one And he said, "Yes, that is mine, and yes, that is mine, and yes, that is them, and yes, that is the one with the canoe." He answered every question he was asked. He answered them quietly. He did not raise his voice once across 9 hours of interrogation. The investigators in the room with him later said that the thing they could not get out of their heads, the thing that several of them dreamed about for weeks afterward, was the calmness of him. Not coldness. Calmness. He had the calmness of a man who had been right his whole life about something, and who finally got to explain it to a room of people who would not understand him, but would at least be required to listen. He said he had loved them. That was the line. The one line. The investigators wrote it down twice in the transcript by accident because the stenographer had to stop and breathe and then start again. He said he had loved them in a way no one else was going to love them, because the world was a hard place for boys, and the boys he chose were the ones who would not have made it in the world, and what he had done was, in his own words, the kindest thing anyone had ever done for them. He said he had watched Aaron and Daniel Vance for 2 summers. He had noticed them in 1987. He had decided about them on the 1st of June, 1988, 6 weeks before the disappearance, when he saw the 2 of them sitting on the dock with their feet in the water, talking the way only twins talk. And he saw, he said, that the world was going to break them apart eventually, the way the world breaks everyone apart, and he could not bear it. He used that phrase, he could not bear it. He said it with the same calmness he had said everything else. He said he had approached them on the path between the boating shed and the apron on the morning of the 10th of July at 8:45, in his groundskeeper's uniform, with a clipboard, and he had told them the camp director needed them at the apron beach for a special photograph, and they had walked with him without question, because he had been working at the camp their entire summer and they knew his face. He said the canoe was already at the apron because he had moved it there at 6 in the morning. He said the boys helped him fold their own life jackets. He said it had been very quiet. He said no one had been hurt in any way they had been afraid of. He used that phrasing too. No one had been hurt in any way they had been afraid of. He said he had sunk the canoe at the base of the dam the next night, because the base of the dam was the deepest reliable cold water spot in the whole basin, and he knew the lake. He said he had placed the compass on the log on the granite slope because he wanted the police to look up the slope and away from the water, and he had known that they would. Because police look the way the trail tells them to look, and he had spent his life watching the way trails told people to look. He said the second compass in the steel box was the one he had bought to replace the one he had taken from the boys, because he said the boys had been very upset about giving up the compass, and he had told them he would give them a new one, and he had meant it. He had bought it the same week. He had aged it. He had kept it for them. Sergeant Pruitt, who watched the interrogation from the next room through a one-way window, did not move for the full 9 hours. He was a man of 75 with a small tremor in his left hand that he had developed 3 years before. The tremor stopped during the interrogation. It came back when he got in his car to drive home that night. The remains of the Vance boys were recovered in the 3rd week of November, 2007, from a location Vernon Whitlock described in detail on a hand-drawn map. They were not in the water. They had never been in the water. They were on a small piece of land Vernon had owned in his own name since 1981, 12 miles east of Camp Wendigo Pines, in a clearing surrounded by mature hemlock where he had built, by hand, over the course of 7 summers, a small, unmarked structure that he referred to in his statement as the resting place. He had not lived there. He had built it for the children. There were 8 sets of remains in the resting place. The investigators identified all of them within 4 months. The 7 other names from the notebook were accounted for. Aaron and Daniel Vance were the 8th and 9th and final children Vernon Whitlock had ever taken. The first child he had taken was a 10-year-old named Cornelius Briggs in the summer of 1976. The reason he had stopped in 1988, he said, was that he had finished the resting place that fall. There was no more room. He had not built another. He had not, he said, needed to. He said the boys he had chosen were all together now. He said that had always been the point. The brain snap came on a Wednesday morning in December when the lead forensic investigator on the case, a woman named Ines Halloran, 48, was sitting at her desk rereading the original July 1988 report on the granite log compass, and her eye caught on a single sentence at the bottom of page 9. The sentence was a note from Sergeant Pruitt to himself, in the original handwritten margin of the typed report, that read the dome of the compass faces north correctly aligned. Neen stared at that sentence for a long time. Then she pulled the photograph of the compass from the box, the second compass, the replacement compass Vernon had bought and aged, and she looked at it. The dome of the second compass was facing north, too, correctly aligned, both of them, the one on the log and the one in the box. She drove 4 hours to the McKean County Jail that afternoon, and she sat across from Vernon Whitlock, and she asked him about the compasses. She asked him why both of them had been placed dome north. He smiled at her. It was the only time in the interrogation record that he smiled. He said, "Of course they were." He said, "That was how you taught a boy." He said, "You put the compass down with the dome facing the way you wanted him to remember home was." He said, that was how his own father had taught him the woods when he was small, and that was how he had taught the boys. And that was how he wanted Sergeant Pruitt to find them on the morning of the 18th of July, 1988, even though by then Sergeant Pruitt was looking in the wrong direction. He said, the compass on the log was not for the search. The compass on the log was for the boys. He said, in case they ever came back. Ines Halloran did not respond to him. She gathered her file. She walked out of the room. She sat in her car in the jail parking lot for 20 minutes, and she did not cry, but she also did not move. She thought of Caroline Vance, whom she had met 3 times now, and she thought of the cracked white mug Caroline brought to every meeting and set on the table between them, and she understood, looking out at the parking lot, that the most disturbing thing in any of this had not been the canoe at the base of the dam, or the steel box with the photographs in it, or the resting place in the hemlock clearing. The most disturbing thing was the compass on the log, because the compass on the log was the moment Vernon Whitlock had decided in his own head that what he had done to those boys was an act of love, and he had wanted them to be able to find their way back to it. That was the worldview. That was the thing that the boys had walked into on a path on the morning of the 10th of July, 1988, when they were 13, with grass stains on their right knees and identical haircuts, and they had walked into it without knowing it, because no 13-year-old knows what that kind of love looks like, until it is too late. Vernon Whitlock pled guilty in March of 2008 to 9 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 9 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. He did not speak at the sentencing. He nodded at the judge once when the verdict was read. He thanked the bailiff who walked him out of the courtroom. He died in the infirmary at a state correctional facility in central Pennsylvania in 2014 of complications from pneumonia, alone 6 years into his sentence. He left no will. He left no statement. He left no apology to any of the families. The investigators who had worked on his case did not attend his cremation. There was no service. The state buried his ashes in a numbered plot. When Sergeant Pruitt, by then 76, drove out to the Vance house on Wexford Street in Marbury on a snowy afternoon in February of 2008 to deliver the news to Caroline and her mother before the press releases went out. He carried the yellow plastic compass that had belonged to the boy's father in his coat pocket. In a small clear evidence bag, finally released back to the family after 19 years. He sat at the kitchen table with the two women. He spoke for half an hour. He told them everything in the order he had practiced in the car. When he finished, Caroline's mother, who was 73 by then and very small in her chair, put both her hands flat on the table and she said thank you, very quietly. And she got up and she walked out of the room and down the hall and into her bedroom, and she closed the door. And they did not see her again until the next morning. Caroline sat at the table with Sergeant Pruitt. The cracked white mug was on the table between them, half full of cold coffee, the thin brown line running down its side. She did not cry. She picked up the mug, she looked at the crack, she looked at the line. She got up. She walked to the kitchen sink. She did not wash the mug. She did not throw it away. She did not put it in the cabinet. She filled it the rest of the way with hot water from the tap, and she carried it down the hall to her bedroom. And she opened the drawer where she had been putting one of every pair for 19 years. The drawer with the hair tie and the single earrings and the single candlesticks and the single salt shakers and the 71 other small things she had been collecting without knowing why. And she put the cracked mug into the drawer. She closed the drawer. She walked back to the kitchen. She took down a clean white mug from the cabinet, one that matched another clean white mug already on the shelf, and she set them both side by side on the counter. Two of them. Together, for the first time in 19 years. She poured coffee into one and water into the other, and she did not know why she had done it that way, and she did not need to know. She sat back down at the table across from Sergeant Pruitt. She said, "You can stay for a while if you want." He stayed for 2 hours. They did not talk much. The light moved across the kitchen floor. At 4 o'clock she did not look at the clock, and the 4:10 that came after it passed unnoticed. When she walked Sergeant Pruitt to the door that evening, she did not thank him for finding her brothers. She thanked him for the compass. She held it in her hand, in its small, clear bag, and she said this was theirs. She said it was scratched here on the dome because Daniel dropped it off the back porch when he was 11, and the dent on the side was from Aaron, sitting on it in the car the summer they went to the shore. She said her brothers had been carrying this between them since they were 9. Sergeant Pruitt nodded. He did not trust himself to say anything. He went out to his car, and he sat in it in front of the small gray house on Wexford Street for a long time with the engine off, and he watched a light come on in an upstairs window and stay on. And he understood, finally, that this was what closure actually looked like. It did not look like peace. It looked like a woman in her early 40s, standing alone in the kitchen of her mother's house, having put away a cracked mug into a drawer that nobody else would ever open, and having taken 2 matching mugs down from a shelf because she could, finally, again, hold 2 of something at once. Camp Wendigo Pines is gone now. The buildings were torn down in 2010, and the land was bought by the state and added to a public hunting lands tract. The dock is gone. The boating shed is gone. The dining hall is gone. The granite slab at the apron is still there, because nothing moves granite, and once a year on the 10th of July Caroline Vance still drives the 3 hours up the winding state road through the hardwood ridges and walks the 400 yards from where the old gate used to be down to the water, and she sits on the granite, and she does not cry, and she does not stay for an hour anymore. She stays for 20 minutes. She brings a thermos of coffee in a plain white mug, and she pours half of it into the lake before she leaves, because Aaron, when they were small, used to say that you should share half of every good thing with your brother whether he was there or not. The lake is very quiet at the apron in July. The fog still comes off the water in the early morning. The wood thrush still calls from the ridge. The basin still holds its sound the way a bull holds water. If you stand on the granite slab and you look out across the inlet to the point where the dam sits 4.5 miles south, you cannot quite see the dam from there, because the lake bends, but you know where it is. You know what was at the base of it for 19 years. You know what came up. You know what came after. You know that 2 boys with grass-stained knees and identical green camp shorts walked off the granite slab on a Sunday morning in 1988 thinking they were going to be in a photograph for the camp director, and that they were trusting a man in a uniform with a clipboard, and that the world did not deserve their trust but they gave it anyway, because that is what 13-year-olds do, and the cost of that trust was 30 years of one man's private definition of love, and the cost of that love was 9 children, and the cost of those 9 children was Caroline Vance sitting at a kitchen table every Sunday at 4 o'clock for 19 years with a cracked mug, waiting for a phone to ring. The phone never rang. A diver did instead, 4.5 miles south of where she had been told to look, and a steel box that should not have existed was raised up out of 46 feet of black-green water, and a notebook in blocky handwriting was opened on a folding table in a state police barracks, and a man on a metal folding chair, drinking black coffee from a thermos, stood up and waited with his hands at his sides. And a sergeant who had been 75 years old and tired and carrying the weight of a wrong assumption for 19 years finally got to be the one who told a woman in a small gray house in Marbury, Pennsylvania, what had happened to her brothers. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone. These are the stories that deserve to be remembered. Aaron Vance and Daniel Vance, 13 years old, who liked to race each other to the canoe rack after breakfast, who shared a yellow plastic compass between them since they were 9, who folded their own life jackets on a beach on a Sunday morning because the man with the clipboard told them it would be a nice photograph, and who were not stupid, and were not careless, and did everything right by any measure a 13-year-old can be held to. Subscribe. There are more coming. Stay with us, because every Sunday at 4 o'clock, somewhere in a small gray house in a small town that you have never been to, somebody is still sitting at a kitchen table with a coffee mug in their hands, waiting for a call that has not yet come. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the call does come. It takes 19 years. It comes from a diver 4.5 miles from where anyone was looking, but it comes. And these stories are the reason we keep listening for it.